chance encounter. The monsoon arrived without warning, transforming the tranquil Maldivian sky into a canvas of angry grays. Talia Bennett secured the last of her research equipment as rain pelted the wooden deck of the Marine Conservation Center. The weather report had predicted only light showers, but the Indian Ocean had its own plans. "Dr. Bennett, there's someone approaching on a boat," called Priya, her research assistant, pointing toward the churning waters. Talia squinted through. The downpour. A small speedboat battled the waves, its single occupant struggling against the strengthening winds. "They'll capsize if they continue," she muttered, grabbing the emergency radio. "Station Coral Reef to approaching vessel. Please divert to our dock immediately. Conditions worsening rapidly." The boat changed course, heading toward their small island. 10 minutes later, a drenched man in his 30s stepped onto their dock, carrying only a waterproof backpack. His dark hair plastered to his forehead, he extended a hand. "Julian Mercer. Sorry for the intrusion." "Talia Bennett. You picked quite the day for sightseeing," she replied, leading him toward shelter. "I was heading back to my resort when the storm hit," he explained, accepting the towel she offered. "The boat operator insisted I'd be safer waiting it out here than continuing. He's gone back to secure other vessels." The conservation center was modest, a main research building with living quarters for the small team studying coral reef restoration. "We're not exactly a 5-star accommodation," Talia said, showing him to their common room. Julian smiled, droplets falling from his eyelashes. "After nearly becoming fish food out there, this looks like paradise." As Priya prepared tea, Talia observed their unexpected guest. He carried himself with quiet confidence, but lacked the entitled air of the typical wealthy tourists who visited the archipelago. His watch was water-resistant but not ostentatious, his clothes practical rather than designer. "What brings you? To the Maldives?" she asked, passing him a steaming mug. "Perspective," he answered simply. "I needed to disconnect. I develop software applications, and sometimes you need to step away from screens to remember what's real." Talia nodded. "I understand that. That's why I'm here instead of in a lab somewhere." The weather report crackled over the radio. No boats would be leaving for at least 3 days. The storm had intensified into a system that would keep them all confined to the island. Julian accepted the news with surprising equanimity. "If you have work I can help with, I'm at your disposal. I'm good with my hands and decent with technology." Over a simple dinner of fish curry and rice, Talia found herself intrigued by Julian. He listened more than he spoke, asked thoughtful questions about her work restoring coral reefs, and seemed genuinely interested in the environmental challenges facing the oceans. "Most people come here for the Instagram shots, not the ecology," she remarked. "I've had enough of carefully curated images," he replied, a shadow crossing his face. "I came here looking for something authentic." Later, as the storm raged outside, they sat on the covered porch. Julian explained how he'd been developing applications for 5 years, downplaying his role to something that sounded like middle management. Talia shared her journey from Pennsylvania to marine conservation, her passion evident in every word. "Tomorrow I'll show you what we're doing with coral propagation," she offered. "Since you're stuck here, might as well put you to work." Julian smiled, his eyes reflecting the lantern light. "I'd like that." As Talia prepared a makeshift bed for him in their small library, she realized this was the first genuine conversation she'd had with someone outside her field in months. There was something refreshing about Julian. No pretense, no agenda, just presence. The storm had brought an unexpected visitor, but perhaps, she thought, it had also brought something else. A reminder that connections could form in the most unlikely circumstances when masks were washed away by rain and pretenses drowned in the storm. Unmasked hearts. The dawn broke with lingering clouds but no rain, casting a pearly light over the research station. Talia found Julian already awake, standing on the shore with bare feet in the sand, gazing at the horizon where the ocean met the sky. Early riser? She asked, joining him. I've always loved this time of day, he replied, before emails and notifications, when the world feels honest. They spent the morning in the shallow waters near the reef. Julian proved a quick study, carefully following Talia's instructions on attaching coral fragments to the underwater nursery structures. His hands, which Talia noticed were too smooth for someone who claimed to work with them regularly, moved with precision under the water. These coral species are particularly vulnerable to warming waters, Talia explained as they surfaced for air. We're trying to identify and propagate resilient strains that might survive climate change. Julian listened intently. It's like developing adaptive software, but infinitely more complex because you're working with living systems. By midday, they'd settled into a comfortable rhythm, working side by side in the shallow waters. The rest of Talia's small team, Priya and 2 graduate students, warmed to Julian quickly. He showed genuine interest in their research, asked insightful questions, and offered to help repair their temperamental generator that evening. "Where did you learn to fix engines?" Talia asked as they shared fresh coconuts in the afternoon shade. Julian hesitated before answering. "My grandfather. He insisted I learn how things worked before I could use them. Said it built character." As the day cooled into evening, they sat on the weathered dock, feet dangling above the crystal waters. Schools of fish darted beneath them, flashes of silver and blue against the sandy bottom. "I haven't felt this present in years," Julian confessed, watching the sunset paint the sky in spectacular oranges and pinks. "In my world, there's always another deadline, another problem to solve, another meeting." "The ocean has a way of reminding us how small our problems are," Talia replied. "That's what drew me here. Everything is stripped away except what matters." "And what matters to you, Dr. Bennett?" Julian asked, his voice soft. "This," she gestured, "to the reef. Protecting something larger than myself, finding purpose in preservation rather than accumulation." She turned to him. "What about you? What matters beyond your code?" Julian stared at the horizon, as if seeing something far away. "I used to know. I built my company." He caught himself. "My applications to connect people, to make technology serve humanity rather than the other way around. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that." They talked until the stars emerged, brilliant against the black velvet sky, unpolluted by city lights. Julian pointed out constellations, and Talia shared Maldivian legends about the ocean and stars, that she'd learned from local fishermen. The next day brought calm seas but no boats. The island's communication system remained spotty, and Julian seemed in no hurry to contact the outside world. He helped Talia catalog new coral growth, photographing and measuring each sample with careful attention. "You're surprisingly good at this for a tech guy," she observed as he correctly identified a rare coral species. "I did my research before coming here," he admitted. "I wanted to understand what makes these ecosystems special." That evening, they hiked to the island's highest point, a modest hill crowned with palm trees. The sunset transformed the surrounding waters into liquid gold. Without thinking, Talia reached for Julian's hand as they navigated a steep section. He held on even after the path leveled out. "Do you ever wonder if the life you've built is actually the one you want?" he asked suddenly. Talia considered the question. "Sometimes. But then I remember that most people never find work that fills them with purpose. And if the purpose changes, if what once drove you no longer does, then you adapt," she said simply. "Like the coral. The environment changes, so they must change too, or perish." That night they shared stories around a small bonfire on the beach. Julian spoke of growing up with expectations weighing on him, of moments stolen in woods behind his childhood home where he could just be himself. Talia described her first encounter with a coral reef at 14, how it had awakened something in her that never quieted. When rain began to fall again, soft and warm, They remained outside. Julian stood, extending his hand to her. "Dance with me?" "There's no music," she laughed. "The rain is our music," he replied, and so they danced barefoot in the sand as rain fell around them, their laughter mingling with the sound of droplets hitting the ocean. In that moment, they were just two people, stripped of titles and expectations, moving together under a vast sky. Later, standing at the doorway to her small cabin, Talia felt something unfamiliar, a longing she hadn't experienced in years of dedicated work. Julian's eyes reflected the same emotion, dark and deep as the night ocean. "Good night, Talia," he whispered, brushing rain-dampened hair from her face. "Good night," she replied, knowing something fundamental had shifted between them, like tectonic plates moving beneath the ocean floor, subtle but irrevocable. As she fell asleep to the sound of gentle rain, Talia wondered about the man who had washed into her life like driftwood on the tide. There was something he wasn't telling her, a depth in his eyes that spoke of more experience than his years should hold. But on this island, away from the world's judgments and categories, perhaps they could both simply be who they truly were, beneath the roles they played. Vanishing tides. The emergency satellite call came at dawn on the fourth day. Talia watched from the research center doorway as Julian paced the beach, his relaxed demeanor replaced by tense shoulders and clipped words. Even from a distance, the transformation was evident, from the man who had danced in the rain to someone carrying the weight of unseen responsibilities. When he returned, his face had hardened into a mask she hadn't seen before. "I have to leave, today. They're sending a seaplane in 2 hours. "Is everything all right?" she asked, noticing how he checked his previously ignored phone with rapid thumb movements. "A situation at work, critical system failure affecting millions of users." He ran fingers through his hair, the casual gesture at odds with his sudden formality. "I'm sorry, but I need to get back." As Julian gathered his few belongings, Talia sensed the man she'd connected with slipping away, replaced by someone more guarded, more distant. The seaplane arrived with industrial efficiency, landing on the calm morning waters with a splash that seemed to signify the end of their bubble of isolation. "Thank you," Julian said stiffly at the dock, handing her a card. "For everything. I'd like to make a donation to your research. It's important work." Before Talia could respond, Priya rushed toward them, tablet in hand. "Dr. Bennett, you should see this." She thrust the device at Talia, excitement evident in her voice. "The storm brought international attention to the region, and there's an article about coral conservation featuring Julian Mercer. They're calling him." Talia's eyes widened as she stared at the screen, then at Julian. The article headline read, "Tech Billionaire Julian Mercer, founder of Nexus Platforms, missing in Maldivian storm." The photo showed the same man standing before her, but in an impeccable suit at a tech conference, not the casual visitor who had helped transplant coral and fix their generator. The article detailed his $40 billion company, his fleet of eco-conscious yachts, his reputation as the conscience of Silicon Valley. "You're not just a software developer," she said, her voice hollow. Julian's face fell. "Talia, I can explain. I wanted to slum it with the scientists, to play normal for a few days, before returning to your real life." The betrayal stung more than she expected. It wasn't his wealth that bothered her. It was the lie. "It wasn't like that," he insisted, reaching for her hand. "For the first time in years, someone saw me. Not my bank account or my company." "You have no idea how rare that is," the seaplane pilot signaled impatiently. Julian hesitated, torn between leaving and staying to explain. "You should go," Talia said coldly. "Your millions of users need you." That evening, after Julian had departed, Talia sat alone on the beach where they had danced. She told herself she was being irrational. He had only been there 3 days. But somehow, in that brief span, he had broken through the protective shell she had built around herself after years of focusing solely on her work. The next morning, a package arrived with supply boats. Inside, she found state-of-the-art research equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, with a note. To continue your important work, I'm sorry for not telling you who I was. Those 3 days were the most real I've felt in years. Julian. Talia immediately arranged for the equipment to be returned. Instead of accepting it, she packed her essential research and personal items and informed her team she was taking an extended leave of absence. The betrayal had crystallized something she'd been feeling for months, her need to reconnect with the core of her work, away from institutional bureaucracy. Tell anyone who asks that I've gone to join the Coral Triangle Initiative, she instructed Priya. I need space to think, to remember why I started this work. Before leaving, she wrote a letter and addressed it to Julian Mercer at Nexus Platforms, headquarters. What happened on the island was real because we were just 2 people, not titles or bank accounts. If that meant anything to you, don't try to find me with your money or your technology. I'll be following the coral migration through Indonesia for the next 6 months. Here are the coordinates of my first destination. If you want to find me, come as the man I met on the beach, not the billionaire in the headlines. I'll be continuing my work in the field, documenting the effects of climate change on the world's most diverse reef systems. No corporate sponsorships, no foundations, just science in its purest form. That's my truth. What's yours? Talia. She included a set of coordinates for a remote conservation outpost in Raja Ampat, Indonesia, knowing it would be nearly impossible to reach without extensive resources, a test of whether he could step away from his wealth and power, to find her on equal terms. As her boat pulled away from the island that had changed everything, Talia wondered if she was being foolish. The rational part of her brain said Julian Mercer would never abandon his empire to chase a marine biologist he'd known for 3 days. But some deeper instinct, the same one that had recognized something special in their connection, whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, she had met the one person who might surprise her. The honest pursuit Julian Mercer stared at the coordinates in Talia's letter, the paper now worn from constant handling. 6 weeks had passed since he'd received it, 6 weeks of board meetings, damage control, and endless decisions that felt increasingly hollow. The shareholders expect you at the Monaco conference, his assistant reminded him as he sat in his sleek San Francisco office overlooking the bay. And the prototype launch is scheduled for next month. Julian nodded absently, his mind thousands of miles away on a small island where, for 3 days, he had remembered what it felt like to be just a man, not an institution. The contrast between that feeling and his current reality had become unbearable. That evening, he called his most trusted executive to his home, a minimalist mansion perched on the cliffs north of the city. I need you to take over operations for 6 months, he said, sliding a folder across the table. Everything's prepared. The board won't be happy, but they can't stop me. May I ask why? His colleague inquired, eyebrows raised. Julian smiled faintly. I need to remember why I built this company in the first place, and I need to find someone who reminded me what matters. 2 days later, Julian boarded a commercial flight to Jakarta, not his private jet. He carried only a backpack containing the essentials: some clothes, a weatherproof camera, basic toiletries, and a well-thumbed guide to the coral reefs of Indonesia. His wallet held a modest amount of cash and a single credit card with a pseudonym, resources limited enough to force creativity but sufficient to avoid foolish risks. In Jakarta, he navigated the crowded streets like any other traveler, staying in a modest hostel where no one recognized the face that had graced the covers of business magazines. He arranged passage on fishing boats rather than charter yachts, spending long hours listening to local fishermen describe how warming waters had changed their ancestral fishing grounds. Julian documented everything, photographing not just the reefs, but the communities dependent on them. He interviewed marine conservationists, learned local fishing techniques, and spent countless hours underwater with basic snorkeling gear rather than the high-tech diving equipment he could easily afford. Each location brought him closer to Talia's coordinates, but also deeper into understanding what had drawn her to this work. In the Banda Islands, he joined a community reef restoration project, spending 2 weeks attaching coral fragments to underwater structures similar to those he had helped with on Talia's island. "You work like someone who cares, not like a tourist," observed the project leader, an elderly Indonesian woman with sun-weathered skin. "What brings you here truly?" "I'm trying to find something I lost," Julian replied honestly. "Or maybe something I never fully had." As weeks turned into months, Julian's body transformed. His formerly desk-bound muscles strengthened from daily swimming and boat work. His skin darkened under the equatorial sun. His designer haircut grew out, tamed only by occasional scissors borrowed from fellow travelers. Most noticeably, the perpetual tension he had carried in his shoulders and jaw, the physical manifestation of constant responsibility, gradually melted away. He documented coral bleaching events firsthand, witnessing the ghostly white skeletons of once vibrant reefs. He sat with fishermen whose catches diminished yearly, whose children might not inherit their way of life. The abstract climate change statistics he had quoted at tech conferences became vivid, urgent realities. In a remote village in the Maluku Islands, Julian used his software skills to help local conservationists develop a simple app for monitoring reef health, teaching young students to code on donated tablets. He avoided mentioning his company or wealth, introducing himself simply as Julian, a programmer interested in marine conservation. 4 months into his journey, on a small island in Raja Ampat, Julian heard rumors of an American marine biologist documenting coral migration patterns in the region. His heart raced as he arranged passage on a local fishing boat heading in the direction of Talia's coordinates. The journey took 3 days, crossing increasingly remote waters. The final approach was through a narrow channel flanked by towering limestone cliffs draped in vegetation. As they rounded the last bend, a small research station came into view, a cluster of wooden structures built on stilts over crystalline waters. Julian scanned the few people visible on the main deck. A woman stood at the edge, her back to him, dark hair lifted by the breeze. Even from a distance, he recognized the way Talia tilted her head as she made notes on a waterproof tablet. As the boat docked, Julian felt a sudden doubt. What if she rejected him? What if these months of transformation meant nothing to her? He had abandoned the trappings of wealth and power, but perhaps that wasn't enough. Before he could lose his nerve, he stepped onto the dock. The wood creaked beneath his feet, and Talia turned. For a moment, she didn't recognize him. This tanned, leaner version of the man she'd met in the Maldives, now dressed in weathered clothes with a worn backpack. Then her eyes widened. "You came," she said simply, her voice carrying across the water between them. Julian nodded, crossing the remaining distance until he stood before her. Not as a billionaire, not as CEO, just as the man who couldn't forget dancing in the rain. "With you." Talia's expression remained guarded. "How did you get here?" "The long way," he replied. "Commercial flights, fishing boats, local buses. I've been following the reefs from Java to here, documenting everything I've seen." He hesitated. "I wanted to understand your world before I asked to be part of it again." She studied him carefully, noting the calluses on his hands, the sunlines around his eyes. "And your company?" "Still there, under temporary management." He met her gaze directly. "I needed to remember who I was before it defined me. I needed to see if I could find my way back to what matters." "And did you?" she asked softly. Julian. gestured to the breathtaking seascape around them, to the living reefs visible through the clear water. "I think I'm getting closer. But I'm not finished learning yet." Talia didn't smile, but something in her expression softened. "We need help with our underwater mapping project. If you're serious about understanding this ecosystem, you can start tomorrow. The volunteer quarters are basic, but there's space." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was an opening, a chance to prove that his journey had been genuine, that the connection they had formed on a storm-swept island hadn't been built on false pretenses, but on something real that could perhaps grow again, given time and trust. As the sun set over the remote research station, Julian unpacked his few belongings in the simple volunteer cabin. Through the open window, he could see Talia on the main deck, illuminated by the golden light of evening as she worked. He had crossed oceans to find her, not with wealth or power, but with humility and purpose. Tomorrow would be the first day of proving he deserved a second chance, not as Julian Mercer, tech billionaire, but simply as Julian, a man who had found something worth more than everything he had built. Beyond facades. 3 weeks passed at the Raja Ampat research station. Julian integrated himself into the small team, taking on the most demanding tasks without complaint. He dove daily to help map the migration patterns of coral larvae, spent hours processing data, and took his turn cooking meals in the communal kitchen. Talia maintained a professional distance, treating him as she would any volunteer. If others noticed the tension between them, they didn't comment. Only at night, when the research team gathered on the main deck to watch the sunset, did Julian catch her studying him when she thought he wasn't looking. On the 22nd day, everything changed. The station's ancient boat engine failed during a crucial expedition to document a rare coral spawning event. As the vessel drifted dangerously close to a reef, Julian stripped down to his shorts and dove into the water with a rope and basic tools. Working underwater for nearly an hour, he managed a temporary repair that got them safely back to the station. That evening, as he methodically rebuilt the engine under the harsh light of work lamps, Talia approached with 2 mugs of coffee. "That was impressive today," she said, sitting beside him on the dock. "Where did a tech CEO learn mechanical engineering?" Julian wiped grease from his hands. "My grandfather ran a boat repair shop in Michigan. I spent every summer there until I was 18. Before coding, engines were my first love. You never mentioned that in the Maldives." There was a lot I didn't mention. He accepted the coffee, their fingers brushing momentarily. "But nothing I said about who I am was a lie, just incomplete." Talia watched the moonlight shimmer on the water. "Why did you really come here, Julian? You could have sent a team to find me, could have flown directly to these coordinates on a private helicopter." "Because you were right," he said simply. "What we had was real precisely because wealth and status weren't part of it. I needed to know if I could find that feeling again, not as a billionaire playing at being normal, but as just a man willing to do the work." "And have you found it?" Julian gestured to his calloused hands, his sun-darkened skin. "I've found something better. Purpose beyond profit. Connection to the world my technology was supposedly making better, but that I'd stopped truly seeing." That night marked a subtle shift. They began talking again, really talking, during evening meals and early morning dives. Julian shared how his journey through Indonesia had transformed his understanding of both environmental challenges and his own company's potential role in addressing them. Talia revealed her struggles with academic politics and funding constraints that had nearly driven her from research entirely. A month into Julian's stay, a violent storm hit the station. The team worked through the night securing equipment and research specimens. Julian and Talia found themselves alone in the lab, racing to preserve fragile coral samples as rain lashed the windows. "I've been thinking about what you said in your letter," Julian said as they worked side by side, "about truth. Mine is that I built Nexus because I believed technology could connect people in meaningful ways. Somewhere along the way, metrics replaced meaning. Talia carefully labeled a specimen. And now? Now I know connection isn't built through algorithms. It's built through presence, through seeing someone, really seeing them, and being willing to cross oceans to understand their world. She looked up, her eyes meeting his. Is that what you've been doing? Trying to understand my world? Yes, he admitted, but not to possess it or you, to be worthy of it. The storm intensified, cutting power to the station. In the sudden darkness, Julian felt Talia's hand find his. Dance with me? She whispered, echoing his words from the beach months ago. By flashlight, they swayed to the rhythm of rain and thunder, no longer strangers or even friends, but two people who had found each other across worlds that rarely intersected, who had both made journeys to meet in this improbable middle ground. The following weeks brought a deepening bond. They led a joint expedition to document a threatened reef system, their complementary skills, her scientific expertise, his technical innovation, creating something neither could have accomplished alone. One evening, as they sat on a remote beach charting stars, Julian shared his vision for redirecting Nexus's resources toward ocean conservation technology. Not as a corporate takeover of your work, he clarified, but as tools created in partnership, with scientists like you, amplifying what you already do brilliantly. And what about us? Talia asked quietly. Is there an us that exists between your world and mine? Julian took her hand. I think we've been creating a new world altogether. One where I'm not defined by wealth and you're not limited by resources. Where we meet as equals, bringing different strengths. Their first kiss came naturally, under a canopy of stars reflected in the still waters surrounding the station. It held the promise of something neither had expected to find, a connection that transcended backgrounds and titles, built on mutual respect and genuine understanding. 6 months after arriving at the coordinates from Talia's letter, Julian stood with her on the deck of a modest research vessel. They had designed it together, equipped with advanced technology but simple enough to be maintained by local crews, perfect for extended research expeditions. You realize your board of directors thinks you've lost your mind, Talia said, leaning against him as they watched their team prepare for departure. Julian laughed. They're half right. I lost the mindset that measured success in stock prices and market share. But I've found something better. Impact that can be measured in regenerated reefs and sustainable fisheries. The new venture they had created together, a hybrid of conservation science and technological innovation, had already attracted attention from environmental organizations and ethical investors. Julian had restructured Nexus to focus on climate, technology, with Talia leading their marine conservation division. What happens when we return to civilization? She asked, the question that had lingered unspoken between them. When you're back in boardrooms and I'm presenting at conferences? Julian turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. We remember this, he said simply. We remember that facades fall away, but truth remains. That we found each other not because of who we pretended to be, but because of who we truly are. As their vessel set course for new waters, they stood together at the bow, no longer the billionaire and the scientist, no longer playing at being ordinary or exceptional. Just two people who had journeyed beyond their comfortable worlds to find something authentic in each other, something that, like the coral they both worked to protect, could grow into something beautiful and enduring if given the right conditions to thrive. The morning sun rose over the horizon, illuminating their path forward, not an ending, but the beginning of a journey neither had imagined possible before a storm brought them together on distant shores.